Okay, everyone. Hopefully we have, let me make sure that everything's recording. We're all good here. Amanda, I'm going to turn your mic on. Amanda, can you hear me?
I can.
All right, perfect. Thank you very much for that.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, we are good to go, and welcome to 2020, everybody, and thanks for getting on the first of a three-call series. This is one I've done a couple of times at the beginning of the year over the years, and I've added some new content to it, and it's the conversations that as a listing agent that you need to master if you're going to increase the amount of listing business that you do in 2020. So there's a lot of things in here that are going to be that I want you to kind of understand some basic concepts that we're going to talk about today, and then we'll get into some more of the advanced stuff. But it's really about the conversations, but beyond scripts. It's really understanding more on how to communicate with sellers versus just talk to them or just get through the beginning part of a conversation with a script or an intro or something like this. It's really understanding what it takes to communicate effectively, because the more effectively you communicate, then the easier it is to convert your leads. And as you begin to convert more leads, you get more confidence, and consumer loves confidence in the person that they're hiring. So there's two parts to today's call, and I'm going to give you just kind of a summary of what they are. The first is going to be real estate sales is a setup, okay? And then we're going to get into the details of that. And then the second part is going to be understanding how to actually, when you're on the phone and you're talking with people, how to generate leads and how to set appointments. So more of the conceptual basis of like, what do you really need to be aware of is going on in that consumer's head when you're making these calls? Because you'll find if you understand the conversation at a deeper level, you're going to be a lot more effective, and you're not just kind of asking questions they're answering. You're getting deeper into the conversation, which shows that you're the right person that they want to work with. So let's talk about the setup. Real estate sales and sales in general typically the conversations need to be a setup. Now, let me clarify, that doesn't mean a setup in kind of a slimy way, or you're trying to tell them one thing and do the other. It's a setup because think about what you do on a daily basis. This is our career. We do this day in and day out. We study homes day in and day out. We know values because we look at the market day in and day out. We research properties. We know areas. We know so much about what the consumer is coming to us for that sometimes it seems like you get a call and somebody's asking you about maybe a particular neighborhood that you're familiar with, and you just sold a home in there. Understand that because we do this every single day, day in and day out, we know the neighborhood, we just sold a home in there. We could easily answer the phone. They could say, I'm thinking about selling my home over in XYZ neighborhood. And you could just simply gather information. How many bedrooms? How big is it? Has it been updated? Where are you at on the street? Do you back to a lake or the golf course? And within like 10 minutes, you could probably, with clear accuracy, give them a real close range of what their property is worth. You could go through, ask a few questions, and then say, here's what we need to do. We probably need to list it at $399. The reality is it's probably going to sell around $385. So if we price at $399, it's going to be a 60-day sale. I know you said you wanted to price at like $415. That might take a little bit longer. We're probably going to have to reduce because people aren't going to put an offer in when it's over $400. In fact, nothing's sold over there. You could go through all that stuff and be 100% correct. But that client is unlikely to actually connect with you and go, that's the person that I want to hire for the job. The reason is because none of the process was set up, okay? So just understand, because we do this role We're studying homes, studying values, studying marketing every single day. It's easier for us to go from A to Z really, really quickly. But understand that's not what the consumer wants. The consumer wants the setup because that helps them understand that you're in this together. No different, and you've heard us talk about we make the correlation between professionals, attorneys, doctors, things where, or professions where you would never just walk into the doctor's office and they just automatically tell you, hey, well, this is what we've done 15 other times, and this is where, this is the diagnosis for you. That's just not how it happens. There's a setup to the process. So when you communicate with the setup, it's all about asking questions. So as you're asking questions, you let the client know that you understand exactly what they're trying to accomplish. You understand that they have a challenge or a problem, and a challenge or a problem could be something simple like, hey, we want to sell and we want to move to a different town. Perfect. What's the problem? Well, they got to sell before they can move. You understand that, and you're there with them to help them find solutions. In absence of that, if we just take them all the way through that process, or as an agent, even if you know how to ask questions, but you don't understand the setup of the conversations, then it can feel uncomfortable for the client, for the consumer. They feel like, we're not on the same page. Like they're just, if you've ever gotten somebody that just said, it feels like I'm just a transaction, that's usually because the setup didn't take place. They didn't see what was coming and go, wow, that listing agent really took care of me on this deal. They kind of told me what was happening ahead of time. So it's all in the questions that you are asking. So when they feel prepared for the process, they feel like they're working with a professional. And just so you know, in the listing side of the business, there is a setup for every part of the conversation, meaning there is a future pacing conversation for every part of the transaction. From we're talking and this is what's going to happen next when I get the research done, to I'm on a listing appointment and I'm telling them what they can expect in terms of activity, to listing the property and telling them what they can expect as we continue marketing it, and to the offer, to the closing, all that stuff. There's what happens, and then there's the conversation with the seller to make sure that they understand what's going on next. So I'm going to give you 4 rules for the setup within the real estate conversations. Okay, there's 4 rules with this. Number 1 is understand that the setup has to involve asking questions to ensure that you know what the client's goals are. We get caught up sometimes too quickly in just trying to lay out plans before we know what the seller's goal is. Perfect example is there could be someone out there that picks up the phone and calls you, or you call them in the next month or so, and you lay out a plan for them that doesn't work for their time frame. And maybe it's because you assume that based on what their circumstance was, they're moving across the country to be closer to family. You assume that they want to be able to do it really quickly. And you find out later, under not so good circumstances, because they think you're pushing them, that they really don't have to be there. In fact, it would be easier for them to get there in June than it would be March. And all of that is because maybe we made an assumption without asking the question of what is really their goal. We have to understand really what is their goal and then formulate the plan based off their goal, not based off all of our past experience. And this is natural for us to just go based off of everybody wants to get sold quickly. And I will tell you, I think that most people do, but there's always the exception to that rule. The second one is you have to ask questions about the future. So when you're talking to them and you're trying to figure out motivation and things like that, it's important to ask them what happens in the future if this does or doesn't happen. An example would be, if we can sell this property in your time frame of 60 days, because that's what they told you, what will that allow you to do? If we could sell this property for you in your time frame of 60 days that you told me, what's that going to allow you to do? And some people will be very, they won't really know. And they'll be, well, I'm not sure. I mean, I guess I move then. And that doesn't tell you a lot. So you can ask it another way. And what would happen, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, if we didn't see a sale or didn't get the contract within that 60 days? Most of the time, people are going to answer one of those, and it's going to give you some insight. They're either going to tell you about the one that, this is going to be great in 60 days. That would be awesome, because then I'll be able to start shopping right away from my home in California. That person's driven by, I'm getting out of here and going to someplace cool that I'm ready to move to. The other person, what would happen if this doesn't sell, is going, well, I can't really afford this. My wife is getting so mad that I have to keep paying this HOA. We thought a second home was going to be, a good idea. And now we're figuring out that it's way too expensive. And the kids are going to college in the spring. If we don't have this sold, it's going to be ugly because we're going to be running out of money. Two totally different scenarios. One goal, sell the property in 60 days. So if that agent doesn't know what's behind that, what will that allow you to do, or what will happen if it doesn't go through in that time period? Very critical piece. Once you know that, the benefit of them getting the job done, or the downside that's going to happen if they can't sell, then you can leverage that information during the conversations that you have in the future. So those could be price adjustment conversations. Those could be offer conversations, but now you have that information. And let me make a very important clarification, because in the past, people hear words like leverage, especially in a conversation about setup, and there's a negative connotation to that. So when I'm talking about leverage, understand you communicating clearly and transparently with your client and finding out what their goal is. You have to know that goal in order to help them down the road make the right decision, or consider if they're making the right decision. Perfect example. You find out that in the example I just gave, they are tired of paying the HOAs. In fact, they've got a kid in college starting next fall, and the second home isn't working out. They're not using it, so they're not enjoying it, and it's costing them a lot of money. There will be a time, if you don't figure that out ahead of time, there will be a time when you're negotiating an offer, and there's going to be, they're stuck. The buyer and the seller are stuck, and neither one of them's coming together, and it's over $2,000. And at some point, if you don't know that information, then it's going to be, what? We can't get them there, and the seller and the buyer are just they're going to move on. If that happens, and that seller doesn't sell now for another 3 or 4 months, and that $2,000 that he was going to pay or give in to get the deal done turns into another $4,000 in HOA, he came out on the short end. So he ended up spending another $2,000. With the information that you gathered in some call previously, now you can present him a logical scenario where he can now make a choice. Mr. Seller, I understand the buyer's not coming up. In fact, the listing or the buyer's agents told me they're about ready to walk away from the deal. We are $2,000 apart. Now, this is 100% your decision, but I remember a while back you said one of the main reasons for selling this property is because the HOA, you're not using it, you're not getting any enjoyment, and you want to be able to free up some cash before the kids go to school. Is that still the scenario? Yeah, that's still the scenario. Okay, let me ask you this. If we lose this deal and the $2,000 is off the table because that buyer walks away, between now and say the end of April, how much are you going to spend keeping the unit? Well, I don't know. If you're going to do the math, you're going to figure out more than $2,000. Okay, so Mr. Seller, I've got to ask you a really important question. Is it more important for you to not spend that $2,000 in negotiating with the seller and eventually pay $4,000 or $5,000 more? Or would you be better off just adjusting what your expectations were for the sale and being able to make sure that you don't own this in 4 or 5 months? Then he's got a choice. Leverage isn't talking somebody into something. Leverage is having the information that you need in order to give them some clarity to look at the situation and make the best decision. Okay, so I want to make sure that you understand that, because leverage isn't talking people into doing something. It's using the information that you know as a professional is going to help them make a good decision. All right. Number 3, and again, these are rules for the setup within the real estate conversation. Number 3, be transparent. Part of being more productive in this business is developing the ability to be 100% transparent with your clients about what needs to be done, and then being detached from the results. Being 100% transparent and being detached from the results. Now, some clients are not going to list with you if you are transparent with them about the price. They're just not going to list with you. Now, most cases, that client probably isn't really motivated to sell. They're motivated to sell at a price. And if you know the market and your price is accurate and they don't want to list at it, you're likely not losing a whole lot. Okay, you're not losing something that wasn't going to happen anyway. They may list with somebody else. If they list with someone else overpriced, there's a good chance that it won't sell. If it does, then that should tell you that you need to go back and look at your knowledge, or look at your education on that market, because you probably missed it. If they took it and it sold and you wouldn't take it because you didn't think it would, then that's not the other agent's issue. That's our issue, because maybe we need to look and say, wow, something in there allowed that to sell. And honestly, there's going to be some times where things just happen. They just get lucky. They took an overpriced listing and they got an offer. If you are in the early stages of your career, there's going to be a lot of these. And talk with your coach, because there's going to be times where you may be in a part of a market where you are taking things at maybe a little bit different price than you would in another part of the market, because there's less inventory. Maybe you will be able to get an offer. So there's no black and white in there, but just understand transparency with the client is absolutely critical, and you being detached from what happens is just as important. And then the 4th rule I wrote down is use your scripts, okay? Use the scripts that you have been given, because those are all designed as a setup. If you think about the pre-qualifying the listing appointment, is a great example of the setup, because you're going through all those questions so that you show up to that appointment and have all the information that you need. It's not designed as a tool to eliminate cancel appointments because they say they want a price higher than you think it needs to be. But it's a setup because you're talking to them about things that you need to know going into the appointment. And now you can be better prepared, meaning you have more confidence, and you walk in there knowing the answers to the questions that you haven't even asked yet. One of the things that you can do to really, really understand beyond just your regular scripts, how do you use this as a setup, is think through the conversation. So think through an initial call. The next step, logically, is to set an appointment. And then the next step after the appointment is to present the facts. Then the next step after presenting the facts is to get the listing signed. Then there's a marketing period. Then there's a negotiation. And then there's a contract to close. All those different parts, if you kind of think through in your head, those are the scripts that aren't written down. Those are the conversations that experience only can give you, in where you can transition from a listing lead to setting appointment, from a setting the appointment to actually taking the listing. Those conversations of, hey, here's what's going to happen next, those are the ones where you have to actually spend some time thinking through those and how do they go, because they're beyond just a just listed, just sold, or an expired script. It's like, okay, I got them to set the appointment. Now what? Well, you got to show up and do the appointment. Well, yeah, that's right. But what's in between? That's the part that you as an agent have to work on so that you feel comfortable when you go into that appointment, those transitions. All right. Well, speaking of transitions, let's move to part two of this call, which is generating leads and setting appointments. So generating a lead and setting appointments starts out with most agents thinking it's a lot bigger deal than it is. So if you are making, if you're on this call building a listing business and you're not making 20 plus contacts a day, then that's step one. But if you're making 20 plus contacts a day and you're not setting a lot of appointments, I want you to just release something from your brain from this call. From this point forward, I want you to release this hallucination that you have. And the hallucination is that setting an appointment is this big thing. Like it's this big moment where all of a sudden all these things come together and you're like, that's an appointment. That's not how it works. That's normal to think that way. I remember when I started, I was like, okay, well, everybody's talking about they got 2 appointments today. Well, what happens? What's going to tell me when I've got an appointment? Let me break it down for you. If you're prospecting regularly, you're going to come across people who want to sell. Whether or not that person is a lead or an appointment is going to be determined by their motivation. And of course, the property value is a big part of people's motivation. So understand there's all kinds of people that want to sell. Whether or not it's a good lead, quote, good lead, hot lead, somebody you're going to turn into an appointment, typically has to do with their motivation. So in order to determine their motivation, you got to ask a lot of questions. We've already talked about that on numerous different times. I'm sure you've heard that. So the appointment is really just the natural ending to a conversation about motivation. All right, so let's get into it a little bit more. Agents get stuck because they're in a constant guessing game, trying to determine if the seller's motivated and is going to be a good selling candidate. Highlight, they get stuck because they're in a constant guessing game. They're guessing, and they usually guess wrong. It's just, at best, we're going to be 50%, so we're going to lose out on a lot of people. Instead of guessing, simply take each prospect through the same process of asking questions and see how much easier it gets to identify potential leads. So in your mind, if you're thinking, boy, I feel like it's just setting an appointment is just difficult. I'm making so many contacts and not setting appointments. First, release the fact that it's this big step. It's not. It's just a natural progression to a conversation about motivation. And the reason that most agents don't set more appointments is because they're guessing. Take the guessing out of it and follow this process, okay? And I want you to start with some assumptions. So some assumptions that you have to make on all calls. Number one, the person on the other end of the line wants to sell their home. It's just a question of when they're going to do it. Okay? Person on the other end of the line wants to sell their home. Is just a question of when they're going to do it. If you think about it, everybody at some point, very small percentage of people buy the home, never sell it, ever. Everybody else is going to. It's just a matter of time. That's assumption number one. Number two, when they sell, depends on what they would do if they didn't own that property and were freed up to do something else. So think about if you're living in your primary residence. At the point that you decide to sell your primary residence, that is the point that you determine, you know what, there's something else that I want to, dream to, have to, might enjoy more than my current property. If it's an investment property, you're sitting there, and at the time that you decide to sell it, there is something that with that cash that you have, equity, or with what you're using to pay for that home, mortgage, what you're getting for an income, there is something different that's more attractive to you than what you have. Simple concept, but we lose track of that a lot of times. This is an assumption you have to make. People will sell when there's something else. So what do we have to do? We have to figure out what is the something else. Number 3, this is a big one. And it's interesting because I've been doing this same coaching boot camp for probably 5 years, 6 years, and the concepts go back 10 years. This one's interesting because it's still the case. Number 3, assumption. You are unlikely to impress anyone simply by the market value in price alone. You're unlikely to impress anyone, meaning you're unlikely to pick up the phone, talk to somebody, and have them go, wow, I didn't know prices were so high. Yes, I want to sell. Here's why. From 2004 through 2006 or 7, depending on the market, prices were absolutely sky high. Unsustainable. We all know what happened. The market crashed. At that time, crash, now we start rebuilding to where we are today. Very few people are motivated entirely by the price that you tell them because, one, they either looking back and going, well, yeah, but it's not 2005. Or even if they're past, because a lot of areas of our market are past where the 2005 prices were. So it's not like, oh, they're still sitting there going, man, I wish I would have been at 2005. But you know what they're thinking? They're thinking, well, if we wouldn't have had that downturn, man, 2005 was like, it was worth 280. It's worth like 295 now, but man, I should be able to get 400 by now. The consumer's never going to be driven by that price alone, I don't think, for a long time, because we were all poisoned by that unlogical, that unrealistic run up in prices. So now that's what the comparison is. Well, it's not 2005. Or, well, if we wouldn't have that downturn, you know, I'd be so much more. I'm going to wait a little bit. Okay. So just understand, price alone is not going to impress anybody. Nobody's going to be like, oh my gosh, I will tell you, 2005, you pick up the phone, call people and tell them the price. They're like, I just got a call like 60 days ago. It was $25,000 less than that. It went up $25,000 in 60 days. Yes. Yeah, I'm ready now. That doesn't happen now. So what are we left with? You better ask some good questions and find out what the motivation is. What's the next step? What can they do if they don't have this in front of them? Number 4, everyone has a price that they would sell for, even if they say they're not sure. Now remember, these are assumptions you have to make on the phone. Every single person you talk to has a price that they would sell for, even if they're not sure what it is. Dig further. It's a requirement, in my mind, it's a requirement in order to have, that you know that, in order to have a powerful listing presentation, whether it's over the phone or in person, it is a requirement to know what price they're expecting for their property when you present price to them, okay? Keep digging. Number 5, assumption. FSBO and expired clients are not simply on the market as a test. They have something better that they can do with their money, with their time, with the mortgage they're paying, etc. They're not just testing the market, even though they tell you that. They tell you that, that's a smokescreen, because they figure you're going to go, okay, well, I don't want to work with somebody that's not motivated in testing it. People don't go and put up with that stuff unless they have something on the other side that would be better for them or could be less painful for them if they didn't own this property. People don't sell things that make a lot of sense unless something else makes more sense. If you work with investors, understand that people do not sell good, well-performing investments unless they have something else that makes more sense than that. It's illogical. They don't do it. So when you get that smokescreen of, oh, I'm just testing the market, or, you know, I really don't have to sell, I'm clear 100% you don't have to sell. But there is a motivation that if they could sell, and maybe it's not for a penny less than their listing, maybe they want 500, it's only worth 400, but they do want to sell. maybe they just want to sell it too high of a price. So don't let people say, no, I'm not really thinking about selling. No problem. But we got to figure out what's on the other end of that, because something has them thinking about it. And when that something is better than what they've got, that's leverage. It's a window to their motivation. So those 5 assumptions I want you to make sure that you keep in mind. Once you have those assumptions ingrained, here's the process that you want to go through with each seller. Now remember, you got to keep in mind those assumptions. And then these are like, if you can imagine, think about the roadmap of your conversation. This is what needs to be included in that roadmap. Number 1, you have to know what the original plan was for their property. So give you the example, primary residence. Somebody owns the home, they have to have somewhere to live. We know that. But if all of a sudden they're considering maybe selling, we want to know what was the original plan for the property. Might have been staying there 20 years and now they're thinking about selling 5 years down the road. That's going to give us some insight into why. It's an investment property. What was their original plan? We were going to make some money. Market was going crazy when we bought, and then we bought and everything turned. So their original plan was A, and now we've got something else that happened. So you have to know what was the original plan for the property. Number 2, how have market changes since they purchased that property affected that plan? How have market changes since they purchased the property affected that plan? Now think about this. You have an original plan. You can use yourself as an example. If you own a property, then think about yourself. And when you signed the contract to purchase that property, in your mind, you had an idea of what was going to happen here. Primary residence, we're going to live here. We're going to put in a pool. We're going to do some landscaping. It's going to be great. We're going to love it. The neighborhood's awesome. Then stuff happens. Investment property. It's going to be awesome. I'm going to buy this. I'm going to have great rentals. We're going to rent it forever. We're never going to have any issues. It's going to make me lots of money, blah, 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 blah. All this stuff. You have an original plan. Then the market takes over. Because none of us can predict what happens in the market, then we can't always predict that our plan is going to stay the same. That's just with the market affecting it. Forget all the plans that happen in our life. Oh my gosh, thought we were done having kids. Now we had 4 more. The 3-bedroom isn't going to work anymore. So all of those things, they have an original plan, and then the market steps in and changes things. You need to understand how have those changes affected what their plan is. Now, this next one, what's the new plan? This is where most people, the new plan hasn't been developed, okay? So when you're talking with people that bought a property, now they're thinking about maybe selling it because the market's gone up a little bit and now they want to move across town. Well, what's the new plan? Well, the new plan, I'm not really sure. I think we just, we want to move at some point. That's where you typically step in and can start guiding them. You can start guiding them and helping them figure out, okay, well, what's the options? Where are you looking at going? What do you need? Figure out the value of the home that they're selling, all of that stuff. They have to develop the new plan. Number 4, and again, along with the assumptions, this is the 4th step of the process that you need to go through in your conversation. You have to know what price do they want to sell. What price do they want to get if they were going to sell? So you have to know price. We talked about that a little bit earlier. Number 5 is, how high is the mortgage? You have to know, do they have the ability? Do they have the ability to sell based on what their mortgage is? Now, this is a lot less important question now than it was 7 or 8 years ago. But if you think about, and there will come a time probably where this will become critically important again. But a lot of people, if they've owned their home for, at least 2 or 3 years, they're selling for a little bit more than they purchased for. And so, they might not be making a lot of money, but they're probably not underwater. Imagine in 2007 through 2014, if you didn't ask the question, how high is your mortgage balance, then you could have someone that was ultra motivated. They knew what their plan was. They knew what the original plan was. It didn't work. They need to get out of it. And then you find out they owe $280,000 on the property and it's only worth $250,000. And they don't have $35,000, $40,000 to bring to the table to write a check and get out of the property. So I still think this is a really, really important question because it helps you understand what they've got available to them, or is this a distress type scenario where you have to offer other options. So I still believe how high the mortgage is, or do they have a mortgage, is really important. But because the market is better now than it's been, I think a lot of people avoid that question. And I wouldn't suggest that, because there'll be a time that we need to ask that every single time again soon. Number 6, this is the transition. This is the part that makes it, okay, the natural progression from conversation about their motivation and the questions to setting the appointment. And it's just simply, great, let's get some research done and find out if the new plan works. Okay, so they've got original plan. Just to recap these, they have an original plan on the property. The market has happened. Whatever's going on in the market has affected what that plan is. Finding out what their new plan is, finding out the price that they want for their property, knowing how much they owe and do they have the ability to sell it. Then it's simply transitioning into, perfect, let's go ahead and I'm going to get some research done and figure out whether or not your plan for the property right now is going to fit with what the market is going to allow, what the market's going to bear, what the market's going to allow you to sell for right now. That's the process. So the critical part, though, is in those assumptions, you make those assumptions on the call, and then you use that framework of the conversation to guide your questions. Because otherwise you're bouncing all around and they don't always make a lot of sense. The seller's kind of like, what's he asking all this stuff for? And when you use a format like this, it's going to be very conversational. And the seller's going to understand, okay, he's really asking questions to figure out whether they can figure out a plan and a solution for me and what I'm trying to do. So set the appointment. The job, once you set the appointment, is to take their new plan. So what they're wanting to do, that new plan is, I want to sell my house for $500,000 because 10 years ago I bought it at $375, and now if I can make that money, I'm gonna move somewhere else. All right, that's their new plan. So you want to take that plan, look at the market, comps, values, etc., and find out if that plan is valid. Find out, is it gonna work? Is it plausible? Will the market bring them what they want for their new plan? If it is, you go, congratulate them, tell them it's going to be wonderful working with them, and you list the property. If the market isn't going to work with their plan, then you provide support, help explain why. Mr. and Mrs. Seller, I know you want $500, you paid $350. 8 other homes have sold at $440 is the highest one. So I don't believe that we are going to be able to get you the $500 based on what the market's telling us. But I've offered a couple other solutions that you might consider. And maybe those solutions are adjusting what they think they want to get out of the home to a more reasonable amount that the market will bear. They don't get as much, but you already know what their motivation is. They want to get to Ohio. Okay, now we have a comparison. Is it more important for you to get to Ohio and do whatever you're doing, or wait until we can get you another $40,000, $50,000, $60,000? Then it's their choice. That $40,000, $50,000 then, if they say, well, no, really, I want to wait. Okay, let's explore that. You want to wait until we get to the extra $60,000 and we can sell it at $500. Just curious how long you're willing to wait. Well, I don't know. I'm thinking maybe in a couple of years. Let's explore that. And then we can run some data and find out that, you know what, the appreciation has been literally like 2% for the last 5 years. Mr. and Mrs. Seller, are you expecting any major changes in the market? Well, no, it seems like a pretty good market. It is. I'm glad you said that. In fact, we've been in a really good market for the last 4 or 5 years, and you know that's equated to about 2% increase each year, year over year. So let's figure out 2% at $425 to make it to $500,000 is going to take a while. Are you willing to wait that long, or would you prefer just to get Ohio maybe a little bit sooner and make up the, the equity there? Oh, I didn't realize. So you really think it's going to take that long? I don't know, but I can look at the data, and the data shows we're about 2% a year. Now, the data may show 7%. And so over the next 2.5 years, they should, if everything goes the same, they should end up there. Back to being transparent and detached, share that with them. And they may say, hey, I'm more willing to wing it for 2 more years and see if we can get there. If not, then I'm going to sell it. So this is the process, the setup, the assumptions, and then the rules for the conversation. Very, very important. If you want to be able to take more listings this year, then get these ingrained, study these, and spend some time trying to figure out how you can get this language down, how you can get the conversations down so that you can be more effective, helping to set up the client for the conversations and be able to leverage their motivation so you can help them make the best decisions. Talk to you on the next call.